Welcome everyone to another Hex Select session. This one is about building a big picture data team with StubHub and Hex and Snowflake, of course. I'm Izzy from Hex, and I'm here today with Meghana from StubHub, who's the head of data, and with Prosh from Snowflake. Meghana is the star of the show. She's going to walk you through what they've done at StubHub to build or sort of to rebuild their data team around some cool principles and tools that she's going to walk through. And Prosh and I are going to sort of MC and hang out for live Q&A afterwards to answer any specific questions you may have about Hex or Snowflake. Yeah, let's crack into it. The floor is yours, Meghana.
All right, thank you. All right. Okay, so just a kind of quick overview of what I wanted to share with you all today and kind of help run through there's really kind of two parts to it. One is the sort of backstory around StubHub and our role on the data team and what we were aiming to achieve over really the last, call it year and a half, and how that manifested in both new modern tooling, namely things like Hex, but more broadly, what we see that enabling us to be able to do both today and into the future. So that kind of gets into the vision. And then to sort of just bring it back to reality and make it a bit more real, we have two demos that I'm really excited to show you that I think really help illustrate what that day in the life ended up looking like kind of before and after, through this transition into a modern data stack. So first, to just kick things off, a little bit about StubHub. So for those who don't know, StubHub is the world's leading source for live entertainment. We are globally available, every country, language, currency, and the idea is that it is this, highly available marketplace for you to be able to, you as a fan to be able to, get access to whatever event it is that you're looking for. On the right, you'll notice that there's really two logos. There's StubHub and Viagogo. And there's a bit of kind of relevant context here. So one thing to keep in mind is that StubHub as a company really consists of two brands. StubHub, which is the brand in the US and Canada, and Viagogo, which is our international brand. And this was really a product of an acquisition that happened a couple of years ago where we came together as one company. And that was really the sort of impetus for why we wanted to start thinking about having a different sort of trajectory when it comes to our data strategy. So historically, this company was extremely good and focused on operational data efficiency. So what this meant was a culture of having really lean data infrastructure. Everybody was extremely data literate in the sense that they were SQL proficient, they were comfortable going into code and figuring things out themselves. And there was really a focus on things like experimentation results and operational metrics, and really sort of keeping the wheels greased for the sort of core focus of the business. And what that resulted in was also kind of a focus on near-term ROI initiatives. So, what is the sort of next most practical thing to do? And this was an excellent strategy. It got the company really far. With the acquisition and the sort of gold mine of data that we knew we were going to have access to, that allowed us to sort of change our thinking about how we wanted to go from kind of a focus on operational efficiency to larger strategic thinking and longer term initiatives. With this legacy infrastructure and the focus on having kind of very lean data infrastructure, there were some inefficiencies that sort of inevitably came along with it. And you can kind of think of these as both consequences to team structure and technology. So when it came to teams, because everybody was very self-sufficient, there weren't necessarily clear lines about who was the subject matter expert for a particular ad hoc question, or even clear SLAs about when a certain team needed data from another team. This was also manifested in the technology itself. So one of the implications of being really lean is that you're not spending a whole lot of time thinking about things like data modeling, single sources of truths for metrics, and kind of building reusable assets. Instead, insights were great, but they were also being shared through one-off assets like Excel files or static reports. The whole idea was to be able to move as quickly as possible and not worry about things being repeatable. So with that sort of mode of operation, what that meant was, from a team perspective, without clear SLAs and clear SMEs, inevitably you have multiple people not only answering the same question, but taking different amounts of time to answer the question, and not always answering the question consistently, right? So one of the core principles of having source of truth data models and source of truth metric definitions is that you can run the same query twice and you're going to get the same results. Here you have multiple people running multiple queries over multiple timeframes. Inevitably, you get multiple results. In addition to that, even if the information was trustworthy, because it was being proliferated through these one-off assets like Excel files, or even just maybe an email attachment or something like that, it really took a big hit to discoverability, reproducibility, and the ability to kind of dig in deeper yourself once an insight was delivered to you, as the decision maker, or the business person. Again, all of these things are less of an issue when you are, small, you're lean, you're moving fast. It's kind of the natural starting point, but because we're now on this journey and we're trying to think about how to scale both as a company and in terms of, gaining great insights out of our data, we kind of had to switch our thinking here. So that kind of led us to this vision for how do you build a big picture data team? And what this really boils down to is that we knew that we needed to be able to do two things really well. We needed to be faster at our ability to infer insights, and we wanted to be better at our ability to get great quality insights. Now, those are both potentially kind of buzzy words. So there's some more specific kind of bullets here to explain what I mean by when I say that. So when it comes to speed to insight, the ideal end state looks like a couple of things. One is that it's just extremely easy to both find and use the assets that you need. And when I say a data asset, that could be a table or a view in Snowflake. It could be a Hex app. It could be a dashboard. It could be a downloaded CSV file. Whatever the asset is, you're able to find it and know what it is and use it correctly. And that actually, I'm going to jump down to the third bullet. That actually kind of fits with not just the data asset, but also the medium where you're looking at it. So when I say tools that meet you where you are, what that really means is that there isn't a one size fit all for the medium that you deliver a data asset. So if you're a software engineer or a data practitioner, maybe your preferred medium is going in and exploring a database or exploring a code repo. But if you're an executive or somebody who's just looking for very quick insights and something that's going to tell you what you need in a very digestible format, that's where things like BI and Viz, come into play. So speed to insight is really about us as a data organization, putting ourselves into the shoes of our users and our broader data community at StubHub, and really trying to do the best job we can of both creating and making discoverable assets that meet people where they are. The other couple of points in speed to insight, one is uniform business decisions or definitions. Kind of alluded to it earlier, but one of the things that happens when you don't have uniform metric and dimension definitions is that there's just more opportunity for things to be open to interpretation. And certainly some things are, more, some things, don't necessarily have a fixed definition. Some do, like financial definitions or, what we call a sport versus a concert. Like those things should be sort of definitive and irrefutable. And lastly, for speed to insight, all of this is only possible if you have the right tech stack, which actually enables fast and flexible development. So for you as an analyst, speed to insight also has to do with your ability to quickly develop. And we'll get a bit more into what that tech stack looks like at StubHub in a bit. And jumping over to quality of insight, here we're talking about, well, again, the quality, right? So one thing that's really key in here is having the ability to double click into underlying drivers. So it's great if you get, a report or something and it gives you some interesting ideas. Inevitably, a great piece of data content leads to more questions. So having high quality of insight means that you are empowered and able to double click and understand the why or the how behind some of the things that you're seeing, which is actually very related to the second point about being able to ask and answer those second order questions. And ultimately, we'll get into this a bit more later in the presentation as well. Ultimately, you're able to go further down the path from descriptive analytics to prescriptive to predictive, which again is really just about double and then triple clicking into what our ability to understand, the trends that we're seeing.
I have a burning question on this slide. These all make like so much sense. It feels so obvious. I'm like nodding my head. How did you actually go about coming up with these for your org? Did you like workshop this around a bunch of people? Did you just like, this is the data philosophy that I know is true? Like how did you actually come up with these driving goals for what the big picture data team would look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, Izzy. I wish I could take the credit and say that I just had these like big brain ideas on my own, but the reality is that it was very collaborative and it was a conversation with our leadership team, the rest of my analytics engineering and broader data team. And I think oftentimes it actually starts with more of the practical realities of like, just what is the dream state? So that was one of the early conversations we had before is, we were hearing about some of these pain points, but even then, I think with, sort of legacy StubHub culture, because everybody was highly proficient in SQL and used to looking at like many hundreds of lines of code for even a basic query, their sort of pain tolerance was actually quite high. Mm-hmm. So if I just went up to somebody and asked like, how hard is your day to day? They would say like, it's actually pretty fine. Like, yeah, if somebody new joins, they need to go through this, 6-week boot camp to get up to speed, but then they're good too. So it's like part of it was like hearing what folks said and then augmenting it by what we've seen at other companies and just our own sort of, dreams as data practitioners ourselves. So it started with more of just the practical, like, wouldn't it be great if I could just click a button and automatically get served the thing that I care about? And then you kind of back into it from there of like, well, how do you realistically get there? And everything from our wish list just sort of tended to coalesce around these two themes. And after that, it was also just a lot of like road showing across the company, and this framing made a lot of sense to us, but I think it also it resonated a lot with our users. So that said, I'm always looking for the next best sort of bumper sticker to describe what we do, but so far I've been pretty happy with these.
Cool.
All right. Okay. As promised, I wanted to talk a bit about the sort of tech side of this. So all of this kind of sounds great philosophically. And honestly, this is probably a diagram you've seen some version of at like pretty much every company you've been at or every presentation you've attended, where in general, the data lifecycle tends to look like this. You start with raw data, you do some sort of data modeling where you have some sort of normalized star schema, then you throw that all into the reporting machine, whether that's DBT or just additional data modeling within Snowflake to basically enrich and denormalize the data to make it reporting friendly, and then ultimately it's served through analysis, whether that's Snowflake and which even just using Snowsight and their UI's been extremely powerful, or for those who love Excel is going to outlive us all, so no hate there. Or Tableau or our experimentation platform, or of course Hex. But this doesn't really illustrate what the day-to-day is actually like or what this means in practice. This is just the sort of like, the ERD. This is just the diagram that shows the lineage of data. The version of the modern data stack that I personally think resonates more is the analyst view. So as an analyst, whether I'm using that term pretty broadly, so that could mean you're a data engineer or an analytics engineer or a data scientist or, BI engineer, pick your title. Everybody tends to find themselves somewhere in this flywheel of looking at data, making some inferences, coming up with a result or recommendation, and that leading to more questions. So that's this sort of wheel that you see to the left, where everything sort of starts with pulling data, analyzing it, publishing some sort of results, that leading to the second order questions, and then that leading to, okay, now we need to collect or otherwise pull or model additional data. And as you're kind of going through this, this flywheel, every now and then something breaks out where you say, okay, this is actually an important repeatable insight. This is something where I need to enable folks with the ability to explore this information on their own. And that's when you kind of hop out of the wheel and create a tool to solve for, to kind of quote unquote solve for the pattern of what you've been seeing. So that hopefully resonates with folks on the call in terms of where most of our work as data practitioners tends to fall. And the icons on here are to help illustrate where that work lays at StubHub today. So you'll see, Snowflake is definitely a big piece of this, certainly for pulling data as our main data warehouse, and also is a great place to do some of that initial analysis, with the abilities that the Snowflake UI provides. You'll also see Hex, of course, prominently featured here, because the amazing thing about Hex is that it's been a great platform for us to both do that, initial prototyping and exploratory analysis purely just for, yourself or sharing within your team and publishing results. But it's also been a really powerful outlet for building apps and enabling things like self-serve exploration. And, you'll see some of the other little icons to represent other technologies we use too. Cool. Okay, so we've been chatting quite a bit about sort of big philosophical ideas and this idea of, here's how you can bring this vision to life through technology. But what does it actually look like? Like, what are some of the concrete assets that we've been able to create as a data team that have actually increased the quality and speed of insight, here at StubHub? So with that, I'm going to present my screen. Awesome. All right. So now we are in the first demo that I wanted to show you all, which was one that kind of emphasizes I believe it's the quality of insights. So this daily top movers report, all kind of fake and anonymized data, but illustrative of the types of insights that our executive team is looking for on a day-to-day basis. So across the top, you can see the big number, object type, just showing movement over, different look back periods. And you can also see some trend charts, as well as, in this case, it's all positive, but the idea of this chart on the right is that you're able to see on a daily basis if you're, up or down year on year. So this paints a particularly rosy picture with this fake data, but one just kind of fun shout out that I wanted to call out here is that thanks to the amazing success of Taylor Swift, we often want to look at our data both sort of pre and post or ex Taylor Swift. So we're definitely all big fans of her here at StubHub.
I know it's all fake data, but just to ground us in the app, what does GMS stand for? Like, what are we actually looking at?
Yeah, good question. You can basically think of it as like gross revenue. So it's just like a top line, like dollar number for sales. So yes, so that's an important call out. This is essentially like a sales report of, how are we doing as a business globally over, over this past year and different time periods. And one thing one of the main reasons we ended up building this in Hex, this is a kind of a no-brainer in certain respects, right? Like the very first report that, you would think to look at, especially as, as an executive at the company is, how are our sales doing? So there were absolutely versions of this that predated Hex and had existed for many years, but they were built across disparate tools, inconsistent data definitions, all of the sort of principles that we had talked about before around, the benefits of having a centralized data team and these kind of more long-term investments. But the other part was that there were limitations to the technology itself. So one key thing that I wanted to point out about what Hex uniquely enabled us to do here was identify drivers for sales in a much more dynamic way. So what I mean by that is if we scroll down, there's certain views that you would always want to see on a day-to-day basis. So it makes sense that over the last week, you want to just see how current year and prior year is looking for different countries, where we operate. Or, you can think of, these are just sort of dummy names here, but you can think of these as like categories like the NBA or, pop music, like whatever sort of categorization of live events we think matters, but in both of these charts, they're essentially pie charts, like the sum of all of this is adding up to total sales. That ends up not being all that helpful on a day-to-day basis, because chances are if the US was one of our biggest markets yesterday, it's still going to be one of our biggest markets tomorrow. What's more interesting and what our leadership was really looking for is, what's useful for me to know today that's different from yesterday or different from the last week. And that's where this concept of dynamic movers came into play. So you can see some of the methodology here at the top, but the whole idea with this report and why we built it in Hex is that this list of winners and losers, meaning the biggest like gain drivers and loss drivers, will and should change day on day, because events change every day. If it's the MLB postseason versus the World Cup, or when Beyonce's on tour, all of those things should show up and should be called out at different sort of grains of the hierarchy. So what I mean by grains of the hierarchy is basically this type column here. What we wanted to be able to do in Hex is uniquely call out anything from an individual team or artist to something more like a genre to something more like a country. And all of these needed to be mutually exclusive buckets so that they're not double counting, across the rows, but are also dynamic in what you consider meaningful. So quite a lot of nuance in there, but what that looks like under the hood, if I switch over here really quick, is essentially a base query that needs to join multiple things together in a dynamic way. So if I scroll further down here.
Do you want to just like Command plus maybe 2 times to make this a little bigger? Sure. I think it'll look better on the screen. Code is always hard to show. Yeah, I think that's
cool. So we'll try to go through all of the code here today, but my main point in kind of showing this up here is that in order to do this sort of dynamic movement, you need to be able to anchor to present year and current year in a dynamic way, and you need to be able to essentially join these different categories of breakouts, whether it's the reporting category, meaning like the team or artist, or the country, or the bigger genre, and build this query dynamically. So you can see our, our little look back Ginger parameters here to be able to dynamically generate these queries. And that's something that's just fundamentally different than how most traditional BI tools work. And ultimately, you could sort of brute force this into a BI tool potentially, but it would require materializing a whole lot of tables ahead of time. It would require knowing what meaningful lookbacks and thresholds for dynamic movement are. And that's just a whole lot of things that you don't necessarily know out of the gate. And what you end up with is, let me move this over. What you end up with is a graph that very clearly starts with a few root queries. So you can see that there's a few here at the top that ultimately drive all of the cells and charts that you see below. So, and this way of thinking of like, I have some root data that I'm dynamically generating, and then that goes and proliferates out to all of these individual insights, is a very uniquely Hex thing, in my opinion. So that was one example where the app itself is, it's static, it's meant to be a push report, but the underlying logic is dynamic in nature and is updating every day, and ultimately yields much higher quality insights than the 5+ daily push reports that the team was receiving before. Now let's switch over to an example that's pretty different in terms of the audience, what it looks like, and ultimately what it's trying to achieve. And this is our example for speed to insight. All right, so let me zoom back out here a bit. All right, so here we have another Hex app Like I mentioned, it's a different audience. So this is really meant for very open-ended, interactive, self-serve exploration. Specifically, this is looking at, again, sales data, but allowing the user, in this case, it's oftentimes a business analyst or somebody who needs, prefers a point-and-click experience, but has a lot of, really great and important questions about our sales data. And in the old world, that meant, like we were talking about before, blasting the question out to multiple teams, trying to figure out who the SME is, maybe waiting a couple of days before somebody was able to write them a query, getting a result back, and then realizing, shoot, I actually needed top 15 instead of top 10, or the way you're interpreting it isn't quite matching like what I'm looking for, and just created a very, not ideal sort of feedback loop to get the insights they're looking for. Instead, the goal of this app was to put all of that data in the direct hands of the business analyst and let them go and slice and dice things however they needed to. So that starts with the filter cell, which is probably my favorite cell out of everything in the Hex app, which, it's just, I love this thing. It's so dynamic, and you can do truly unlimited combinations of, and or statements. I promise these are my own opinions. No one's, Izzy did not plant that.
No, but I'm glad you're highlighting it. I think a lot of Hex users, even experienced ones, don't realize that you can put filter cells in published apps for users to interact with. So I'm delighted to see one in a published app.
Yeah, absolutely. It's ended up being like a very common pattern for us of like, anytime it's self-serve Explorer, the first thing is like, okay, there's unlimited combinations of filtering that somebody probably wants to do. So let's just give them that ability. So you can see that I toggled something, but no results are displayed yet. And that was really intentional because we wanted to gate this builder on a run button. And that's because the story doesn't end with the filtering. The thing that was, again, unique to Hex and what we were trying to do is dynamically generating a query based on the dimensions and metrics somebody's looking for. So that was a mouthful, but really what I mean is if you click into dimensions, so this is just a list of parameters that you can choose from, there's all kinds of different things you can cut by. You could be wanting to look at the country where the event is happening, or the larger region, or maybe you're on the marketing team and you want to look at the channels that those sales are being driven from. So if I do that, I'm making a bunch of changes, but what we didn't want is for every time you click a button for you to start seeing results before you're actually ready to look at it all together. So that's really why we added this run button. And then similarly for metrics, here I'm looking at say revenue and tickets sold. So I'll leave that as is, but you can see that there's other choices. So once all of this looks good, and I'm saying, yep, what I really want to know is how many sales did we have by channel specifically for concerts in 2023 or since beginning of 2023. And then you can hit the run button and then you get your results. And as you can see, that was all pretty speedy. And then when we look under the hood for the notebook, I can kind of show you, why that sort of happened so quickly. And that really speaks to some of the integrations with Snowflake and our ability to do pass-through queries. But here you can see the result set, and you can see that we have the channel because that's what we chose for our group by. And here we have revenue and tickets because that's what we chose for our metrics. So went through a lot here, but essentially what we were able to build, and this was actually one of the very first things we tried with Hex just about a year ago now, was, wouldn't it be cool if we could build one single app that's essentially a Swiss Army knife tool for any cuts of sales data that you can imagine. And that's what we were able to do here in still a pretty lightweight deployment way. So in a traditional, BI ecosystem, this would require, having a semantic layer and other drag and drop tools. And there's, again, there are other ways of doing it, but nothing as sort of light and fast as what we were able to do here. And then one other just sort of cool thing that we did was we did a little bit of hacking on this chart where it also is dynamically setting the X and Y axes and the group bys and the sums. So these are all things you can toggle as well. So if we jump over to the query builder, there's something specific that I want to show you all in terms of how this works. What we'll see is that there is this base table that's running that's saying, okay, here's just, all of this sort of the complete data set that I care about. And really key in here is in the real version of this, this is a huge query. So we wouldn't actually want to try to pull all time transaction data into a single data frame. Instead, we use query cells. So what we're saying to that Hex app is, for now, just think of this as a pass through to Snowflake. At some point further down the line, we're going to filter it down and actually want to store that, in memory. So that I think was a really key feature, because until we did that toggle, there's no way this thing was going to run, because you're just trying to load.
Oh, I wish we could have shown that with the fake data. It's basically like lazy execution. Like you lazily execute these intermediate queries and sort of only run the full thing, which could be slower once you've already filtered it down. Is that the?
Yep, 100%. That's exactly it. Is like we know that we're going to do. Everything sort of follows the same journey in these kind of self-serve Explorer tools, where you have the entire universe of data that you could be interested in looking at. Then you have some ability to filter to the thing you actually care about. And then in this case, you then say, okay, how do I actually want to aggregate and display the data? Ideally, you're not storing things within the app until you've done all of those operations, because now you've culled down to what you actually care about and want to surface, versus trying to store a huge amount of information of which you're only actually going to, surface a small amount. That's my mental model for when to use query cells. I think the Hex docs do a better job of explaining that than I could. Cool. And if we scroll down here, okay, this little cell is actually where all the magic is happening in terms of this ability to do dynamic query generation. So this is really sort of thinking creatively about how you can use things like Ginger parameters. So this probably doesn't look like a SQL query to you, because it's not, right? It's a whole bunch of just brackets and percentage signs. But if we look at like even just one piece of this here, so if we look at lines 3 through 7, you can see that what it's saying is, as long as you've selected something more than no dimensions, because again, an option could be that I don't actually want to cut it by anything. I just want like the full sum of revenue or tickets sold. But as long as I'm trying to cut by something, then I want to make sure that I put those dimension names in the select statement. So this is literally creating the query text to say select venue country code, comma, venue macro region, comma, and then you get into the metrics part of that select statement, which is saying, if it's something like a unique buyer or seller count, then what you want to do is a count distinct. But for everything else, you can assume that the type of aggregation you want to do is a sum. How slick you can get here doesn't end with what we've built. You could totally parameterize the aggregate function as well. So if you wanted, you could have yet another toggle here that says, what is the aggregate type that I want? And then you could do, min, max, average, and all of those things as well. And then essentially this is the rest of our SQL statement. You can see the actual query text that's generated from this Ginger parameterized text generation. So this is really like the heart of it. So if we're going to make this available when you go in and take a look at it, I would say this cell is really the main thing that you'll probably find interesting, because this is really how we're able to dynamically generate this query text. Anyway, I'll pause there. There's more to the notebook and how it works, but encourage you all to explore that on your own. And with that, we're going to jump back over to the deck. Okay, so really just some closing thoughts here. Now that you've seen the demos and hopefully sort of help connect the dots from these, big vision statements like speed and quality of insight to, some practical examples. And the last thing I wanted to leave you with was essentially this idea of, what does it mean to sort of build for the future? And, we're obviously not done here. We're still pretty early in our journey, both in terms of what we want to create in terms of like a culture of data literacy and data enablement at StubHub, and also, frankly, what we can do with tools like Hex. I think we're just scratching the surface of what we're able to do here. So that's what this little red arrow is trying to indicate is, if you think about the type of analysis and insights that you can create, things tend to kind of follow this funnel or this hierarchy where the logical first place to start is descriptive analytics, right? At the foundation, you should be able to answer questions about the current state of your company's business, things like performance, things like year on year, things that are purely factual and descriptive, but aren't necessarily telling you what to do or even sort of why it's happening. What we see is sort of the second stage down from just descriptive is explorative. So that means, what are the underlying drivers? Do I have that ability to double click in and understand some of those non-obvious data insights for what is driving some of the descriptive information you're seeing? And I'd say we're somewhere sort of in the middle of our explorative phase right now, as a data organization. Not to say that there isn't great predictive analytics and prescriptive work that's being done, but as part of this like data strategy, I think we've done a pretty good job of building the infrastructure and apps and culture around interacting with our new data platform for descriptive and explorative. And as we go into 2024, we just want to be able to move further down this funnel. So ultimately, what would be amazing and great for everybody at the company is if we can move past this idea of explorative and get into some of these really hard and nuanced questions about, okay, you built me a dashboard, I'm able to explore, I can see what's going on, but what do I do about it? That's always been one of the hardest questions to answer, especially in an automated way or purely through tooling. And ultimately, we do want to be able to get to these more nuanced questions around, what are the causal relationships? Like why, not just what and why is this happening, but what do you do about it and what's going to happen in the future? So I'm really excited about us moving into prescriptive and predictive worlds. The last thing I'll mention there, though, is that tools are only as good as the data that's being put into it and the people who are using it. So part of this movement in our journey from descriptive down to predictive, it's not actually just about, building great ML models or, having more advanced analytic capabilities as a data team. It also requires a really, really strong foundation of high quality, reliable data. So that's where something like Snowflake has been really, really key in establishing a great data warehouse foundation. And of course, you need to have great data engineers and folks, on our team who are building that highly reliable and high quality data. Sometimes that can feel like the sort of, eating your vegetables part of the data role, like thinking about things like data management and data quality. But without that, none of this is possible. So I can never emphasize enough how important all of that is. But the last piece of the puzzle is also our larger data community. So when you talk about, building a culture of data enablement and data literacy at a company, that does not happen overnight, right? Like you need to have buy-in, you need to have, great people with critical thinking skills and an interest in learning how to engage with data in the right way. And I feel very fortunate that the folks at StubHub and everybody that we get to work with totally fit that bill. And it's really just us kind of off to the races of how quickly we can empower, all of our great colleagues with, insightful information. All right. And with that, I just want to say thank you and thanks, Izzy, and excited to get into the Q&A.
Yeah, I have so many questions, but I think we should probably let the viewers ask their questions first. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Sorry about the blurry quality on some of the screen shares. We will share out those apps with you, so you'll be able to actually get hands-on with them, or at least the second one. And we'll also try and upload a higher resolution version of that, so you can see it in all of its HD glory. And you're welcome to ask any specific questions about things that you weren't able to eyeball yourself. So feel free to pop questions into the official Zoom Q&A, and we will answer them here live. Maybe while there's a few questions teed up that we'll hit while people add some. The first question is an interesting question, I think, for you, Meghana. How easy is it to maintain and reuse the code? They said there seems to be like a lot of code there seems to be code for a lot of the functionality that you were covering. What does that like maintenance and reusability look like for you all?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for whoever asked that. And also, as you can see, I did a little bit of teleporting and I'm in a different location. But in terms of reusability of code, I think out of the box, there are a couple of Hex features that we're excited about. One is just being able to do like reusable components. So that's what it's called, right, Izzy? The components? Yeah. So with that, which we have definitely use that more for things like boilerplate setup. So if we know that we're, trying to access a certain API or something, you can just make certain snippets available. So I think in terms of like when it's very clearly like a pattern that you just want to be able to copy paste, that's been really helpful. The other thing that I think we're probably going to make more use of this coming year is the GitHub integrations. So the ability to like be able to really templatize blocks of code and say like, okay, this is the sort of master template for anytime you want to do like a query builder. That way we can kind of, actually manage it through something more like a code repository. But I would say the honest answer for right now is that because we're still pretty early in the journey and we have only just kind of begun building some of these like archetypes of notebooks, that we've kind of made do with the like tagging and just like naming conventions and things like that. But yeah, it's a great call out because the more we kind of build on these notebooks, inevitably the more complicated the code is going to get as well.
Great. Let me peruse the question log. There's lots of really interesting questions. When I get to a good mix of technical and bigger picture. Daniel had a great question on the topic of thinking big picture. How do you actually transition and take the analytics org from being reactive to proactive? And my guess is that he's talking less about like which tools do you buy and more about like setting the culture and the overall mission. And if you have any tips from your experience.
Yeah, totally. That's an excellent question, Daniel. And I'd say the transition from reactive to proactive, it's kind of a shared journey between the analytics org, like ourselves and our business partners. So I think in my experience, I found it to be pretty organic where the more, and kind of at the heart of it is having shared wins. So the more we're able to kind of encourage a business partner to tell us, not just what they need right now, but like, hey, let's take a beat and talk about what you're hoping to accomplish over the next 3 months. I think the trap, we often fall into both as an analytics org and even just as kind of an overall data or data science platform is like we're kind of doing this whack-a-mole with the problems that we see coming up, and we're just trying to keep the lights on for the business. So I'd say one, definitely easier said than done to find the bandwidth. Sorry, I don't know how, I always do this like Zoom thing. Finding like carving out that space to have those more strategic conversations. And then I'd say the single biggest thing that actually makes the switch from reactive to proactive is having a shared win and kind of proving that those having those conversations ahead of time are useful. I'd say then within the analytics org, building that culture and building that muscle is also not easy. And I think that's where it again becomes that sort of combination of people, process, and technology. You just have to, kind of have that culture internally of wanting to do those like deeper, more sophisticated analytical problems, you need to have the tools to support that. And then process in this case would be things like having regular cadence meetings, and even things like org design, I think helps. Like within our company, we have dedicated partners for each of the kind of business vertical leads. So there is a person on my team who's sitting down regularly with our, our head of marketing or our head of core product to have those higher level conversations.
I'm gonna synthesize a couple of tool questions and try and hit them with one stone. You talked about Snowflake and kind of like all the parts of your flowchart or the like cycle. And I feel like people often talk about like, we migrated to a modern cloud data warehouse and everything's perfect. What are like the specifics of how that actually makes your life better across the specifics? Like what was the like really tangible specific impact of moving to Snowflake?
Yeah, totally. I feel like I can speak to kind of the results we saw, and I think Prosh can definitely speak better than I can to sort of like why that is possible and like what is it about that, that integration in the product that makes it possible. But I'd say right out of the gate, one of the most compelling and just irrefutable arguments around the move to Snowflake was around speed to insight. Like it's just fundamentally a faster platform that's going to do better at like long periods of time and just like high compute data, and along the way not having to think about exactly how you're tuning every part of the query. Obviously that's still extremely important and not something you should take for granted, but not to the like down to the science that we had it with our legacy system. So I'd say right out of the gate, just the kind of out of the box benefits of having that all the benefits of Snowflake compute. And then with Hex in particular, and having that as one of the key like access points for Snowflake, the way that it unlocks integrations with Snowpark and the kind of seamless back and forth that you can have between cell types, I think was also really key, because then again, if you compare that to the legacy workflow of, okay, shoot, I have to spin up my own Jupyter Notebook cluster. I might have some code that I'm managing locally, and then I also have something that's running in like a VM. That sort of like just the managing that as like one individual person is just clunky. So I think speed to insight was where it started, and then now the sort of, to Daniel's question earlier around kind of switching into something a bit more proactive, the dividends that get paid by doing data modeling and having like not just a faster warehouse, but the types of assets that are going to be more performant overall and just more kind of human readable. That's again like now where we're seeing some of those like bigger picture things that are paying off. But yeah, Prash, that said, I'm sure there's a more technical answer to the question, so would love to hear from you.
No, I think Meghna, you touched most of the points. Like I would say, the one key aspect with what I say, like Snowflake, what makes unique is that it's the ease of use, like how easily you can use Snowflake as an environment. And specifically, like you talked about speed, you talked about agility. One of the key USPs of Snowflake, and of course, working with Hex, has been having access to the data, having single copy of data in a much more secure and governed way. Like there is no ingress and an egress of the data in that case, where, for example, specifically talking about with Hex integration, we have touch points and integration at every stage of the machine learning lifecycle, all the way from data ingestions to the feature engineering and in terms of the deployment, as well as you've seen in the demo. Everything is happening within the Snowflake. So there is no movement of the data. So everything is, all the compute is happening within the Snowflake. So the people who are at the decision level, they are secure. They think there is no movement of the data. And in terms of the Snowpark, is one of our development frameworks where you can, it's a delight for the coders, where you can run the code of your choice in your preferred language, from like Python, Java, Scala. So right now, in terms of Hex, it is very well integrated. So with one click of the button, you can actually initiate a Snowpark instances, and if you imagine you have millions and millions of lines of codes and all the computers running in Snowflake, and it's easy to use. So I would say it's a delight for the users. I will completely urge people to start using Snowflake and Hex together with their trial versions, but you can actually experience best of both the world. But you hit all the major points here, Megan.
Manuel asked a really interesting, really specific question for you, Megan. Has your data team's budget been affected by this new data strategy and the mindset and process? And really specifically, what would be a percentage that you'd recommend to have on your data team relative to the company's total revenue? Is 4 to 5% of total revenue okay, or too conservative?
Oh man, well, I love how this is clearly a very analytical and data-driven audience, asking good quantitative questions. It's honestly, I don't know if I could put a number on it quite as it's like framed here. I think it's also very contextualized by the company that you are at. So I've, in prior lifetimes, was at some of the larger like FANG companies and things like that. And there, I think the equation can be quite different because, places like Airbnb or Netflix or Uber, they're often in the business of developing like new platform technologies that they then open source or get spun off and things like that. So there, the investment in something like a data team, the equation's a bit different because there's like from the beginning that you're planning to build a lot of things like in-house. So I think one sort of like early conversation to have with your CTO and your executive leadership team is what is the vision for the types of investments we want to make as a data team, and that covers like data engineering and data platform, the analytics platform, as well as like the data science platform. So I'd say that's sort of the first kind of piece to the puzzle. And then in terms of like people and the type of investments you want to make there, I think the other kind of part of the equation is the level of maturity of the organization and what the real kind of buy-in is for that company to be, kind of quote unquote data driven or data informed. That's a buzzy word that a lot of companies are going to say, but when it comes to actually setting the budget, that's really where you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is, literally. And so I would say those are probably the two kind of pieces of context that I would start in. And then I would say for sure, like it's something that grows over time. So, again, just to kind of help give a number, to contextualize some of what I'm saying, this time last year, our analytics, this like kind of new wave analytics team was me and one other person. And now that team is up to, I think, about 8. And similar growth across the rest of our data team as well. So I wouldn't extrapolate that forever, but I would say for making some of these inroads and getting buy-in from our strategic partners and things like that, that's kind of a healthy growth for that first year. Izzy, do you think that? I know it's like I hope I didn't like skirt around the question too much, but
I don't think so at all. And Manuel actually just posted in the chat. Thank you. Very insightful.
Great.
So, okay, we've got time for a few more questions. Maybe I'll ask all 3 of these questions, and you can sort of combine them. I want to try and hit as many as possible. One person asked, how did you manage to create those uniform business definitions, and how do you actually expose them? Is it through like consolidating reports and exposing only the gold standard reports, or what? Another person asks sort of broadly, like, regardless of how robust or well designed your data stack is, maintaining trust and data accuracy and quality and credibility with stakeholders is like a perennial challenge. How's your tech stack approach or other strategy like successfully waded through that challenge of maintaining trust and accuracy, quality, credibility, and then also like the definitions themselves?
Yeah, both excellent questions. And I'd say again, the honest answer is we're pretty early on the journey. So things like uniform business definitions, I think there's a lot more to come, and figuring out, the right, again, technology, process, and people kind of combination to give everything, especially uniform business definitions, a longer shelf life. I think with something like business definitions in particular, the earlier you're able to think about centralization and uniformity, the better. So I'll give a shout out to my former colleagues at Airbnb who've built this amazing system both for codifying metric definitions and surfacing what are considered gold standard metrics, dimensions, and reports. So they've built something extremely sophisticated, and that was to support the fact that there were, many, many thousands of those assets. So I think it's also about right sizing the controls and the sort of level of certification that you want to invest in with how far you are on that metrics journey. So for us, starting from basically zero, we're not going to go straight to that more very sophisticated solution, but I think there are a lot of really great lessons learned in there around what can you do that is low friction, but ultimately, to borrow something Prash said, a delightful experience for users. And all anybody wants to do when they're starting to engage with a data portal or whatever your discovery outlet is just get to the thing. I want you to know the thing that I need right away. So that kind of, I think, plays into Ezra's question around what can you do within the tech stack to kind of build that longer shelf life and maintain trust long term. And that I think gets into strategy around just good data management principles. So I guess I'm giving kind of a long answer, but what I'm really trying to say is that the more work you can do upfront to think about what your literal metric definitions are, even if that's just opening up a Google Doc or a Word doc and keeping that as your central source of truth, even that is a great first step in the right direction, because then everybody can kind of focus on that and at least agree to the words on the paper for what definitions are. Similarly, with things like alerting, life cycle policies, ownership is another really, really huge one. Being able to track the long-term ownership lines of even something like a metric definition is going to save you tons and tons of time in the future, because you have a process in place to know, for something like revenue, it's probably somebody on the finance team that should own that. Oh, shoot, there's 15 different variations of it. What can we do to annotate or assign owners or assign some sort of gold standard check mark to it? Those are all things that the earlier you start thinking about it and making process, I would start with the process side of it and just documentation. The more you're going to save your future org tons and tons of paying back tech debt.
There was one more question about how you navigate the challenges for onboarding non-tech teammates to get access to this. It feels a little bit like you might have just sort of covered that. Is there anything else that you want to expound on there as a last question?
Yeah, totally. I think again, the more proactive you can be, the better. So, catching people during their, first few weeks, having that investment in data education, I think is, again, huge and much easier said than done, because that is yet another asset that you need to keep up to date and continue and kind of do continual investment in. So again, I'm definitely going to pull some great learnings from what Airbnb and other companies have done in the past. But I would say the other piece to the puzzle that's also really helpful is, as much as you can, having single points of contact for different parts of the business. So if you're, imagine you're a new person on, the business development team, it can totally be overwhelming of hey, we've got these tools and here's these training decks and here's these channels. But at the end of the day, just knowing, hey, I have a dedicated analytics partner or a set of people that I can go and ask, my dumb questions to start, I think is really encouraging and helps kind of lower that barrier to entry and just makes, people more comfortable with getting their hands on the tools. And for sure with Hex, and I think with really any kind of analytics products, the scariest part is trying it for the first time. And I think the more you're able to have that, phone a friend option and a person that also understands what you're trying to do and where you are, like where you kind of live in that data community. I can't overstate how helpful I think that can be as well.
Great. Well, we are at noon. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Meghana and Prash, for being here. This is super cool. Remember, we're going to send out an email with links to an app that Meghana demoed, as well as a way you can rewatch the session, hopefully in higher quality. And I think that's it. I think we got to every question, but if you had one that didn't get answered, send us an email. I've sent you lots of emails inviting you to this, so reply to any of them, and I'll make sure that your question gets to Meghana or Prash or myself.